So why don't you use the regular army? What do you need us for?
Because some damn fool accused you of being the best.
Dylan! You son of a bitch!
Hey Exiles, Chronic Painless here with the patch 3.22 update to my Blade Vortex League Starter build guide. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the changes that I've made to the leveling portion of the guide in response to the campaign meta shakeup from last patch, now that I've had a little more time to test out some different theories. Then I'll go over the most important changes from the patch notes that were released earlier today. As for the campaign, losing access to the vendor recipe wands was a pretty big deal and definitely made things feel worse for a long time. However, I did realize that if you rush for the mana reservation mastery, you can add a second herald to the build or even wrath on top of your skitterbots, which significantly increases the damage of your Stormblast mines and Orb of Storms, just about making up for the loss from the vendor recipe wands. Plus, you can always find a decent wand on the ground, so don't be afraid to be a little bit of a pack rat and pick up a few extra. I also highly recommend adding shield charge to the build as soon as possible, basically as soon as you swap to BV, because the addition of the lightning golem really makes up for the lower level gems and makes it feel like you are already rocking a level 20 shield charge in terms of attack speed. Aside from the mana reservation mastery, I also recommend pushing really hard into early investment into freeze duration, because this will enable you to make use of the cold mastery that makes enemies take increased damage for how long they've been frozen. This really does make a huge difference on some of those longer boss fights and tankier rares that get in your way, and so I highly recommend getting as much freeze duration as you can early on, as it acts as a huge more multiplier on your effective damage when it comes to freezing. As for ascendancies, I've waffled and gone back to suggesting Shaper of Storms as the first ascendancy to get once you've finished off your golems, instead of the Mastermind of Discord. Master of Discord is definitely better on paper, but when you take into account that not everything will have cold exposure on it, Shaper of Storms is just so much more reliable and feels a lot better. However, once you do get enough levels and enough money to where you can get a Heraldry Cluster Jewel, Mastermind of Discord easily gets back on top. That being said, I'd even go as far as to highly endorse taking Bastion of Elements before going into Mastermind of Discord for your fourth ascendancy, because of the incredible potency of the Bastion at that early stage when you are lacking the Heraldry gem. As for gearing during the leveling section, there's only really one change I would highly recommend, and that is going for a Mark of Submission ring. The difference that you get from a max level gem applying the curse versus a regular explicit is huge, and especially when you need it most. And so I have found in my own testing of different options here that the Mark of Submission is well worth having to make up the attributes somewhere else, especially when you consider that rings are very hard to get damage from generally without very high investment, and the same can be said of jewels. Whereas early on, you can certainly afford jewels that make up the attributes you're losing from the ring before you can invest into critical strike multiplier jewels later on, and at that point, you might want to look into a different ring as well. Now, let's talk about the changes that we know are coming in patch 3.22. The first and most important is how good is BV going to be at this new league mechanic? And to be honest, we don't really know until we find out, can the mobs be frozen? If they can, we're going to absolutely cruise through it. If they can't, well, we might have to do some gaming. So we'll just have to see. And speaking of freezing everything and cruising through it, the Sanctum is coming back and BV is ready to kick its ass again. So don't be afraid to get in there and go after those divines, as Cold BV will freeze even the most dangerous mobs before they have a chance to actually take away your resolve. Now, we won't be able to super cheese the Sanctum like we could during the actual league, with the Soul Ripper Flask letting us kill everything from off screen due to the new 100 unit max distance rule that they've added. But to be fair, you know, that was a little bit too cheesy even for my tastes, and I still think that Soul Ripper is going to provide a lot of benefit in those combat rooms, enabling you to get the Veil BV online much faster and just cover the whole room in Blades of Death. So I wouldn't worry too much about this very niche cheese strat being taken off at the table. In fact, it would have been a little rough even without the Sanctified Relics, providing that extra flask charge gain. And so we'll just have to rely on good old-fashioned freeze to carry us through the Sanctum once again. Now, moving on to the changes that we learned about from the patch notes, there's really not a whole lot to talk about. The change to the Occultist Ascendancy, the Frigid Wake buff, could not have been more farcically inconsequential. It's kind of funny that they managed to isolate the most useless part of the entire Ascendancy and give it a tiny buff while also stripping it of the only possible use case that it could have gotten out of some extreme hyper investment into freeze duration by giving it a 50% chance. So, you know, just pretty much ignore that. So nothing was taken away from the build and very little was changed. And as far as new opportunities, none of the uniques that have been teased so far are particularly attractive, but if there is anything that comes out in the coming week, I'll be sure to post a new update. And the support gems, I think that the Spellblade support is going to be pretty much a non-starter for this build. Blade Vortex has really poor effectiveness of added damage and really amazing effectiveness of skill gem levels, so I haven't been able to run the numbers just yet, but I can't imagine that we're going to be able to see a weapon that is better than a skill gem weapon, especially when you consider that you'll be giving up a support gem slot to make use of it as well. The new Guardian Blessing gem, on the other hand, is fairly interesting, though I wouldn't get too excited about it, especially if you consider the Elementalist Ascendancy gets a lot of quality of life from the fact that those golems are automatically respawning. But with this Divine Blessing, it looks like you're going to have to be reactivating the aura whenever the minion respawns. And so, adding that button push back into the mix does kind of defeat the purpose a little bit. And certainly, adds more cast time and just more hassle to the build in general. However, it's probably going to be easier to make use of than a Divine Blessing, which, with the mana cost, could be prohibitive. Especially when you consider that using Eldritch Battery was not a great option for the build, given how much benefit we get from inspiration support. Tattoos, however, are very exciting, as we have to pass through a ton of useless int as we make our way around the top of the tree there, on our way to the power charges and various cluster jewels, and being able to turn that intelligence into something like just straight up mana reservation efficiency could feel amazing. I can't wait to see all of the different tattoos and just how easy they are to come across, as we just have so much wasted int on this build that it almost feels bad, and now we don't have to feel bad anymore. Well, that's all I got for this video. I'll be back next week with some League Start practice, and of course, I'll be streaming my entire League Start starting next Friday at the League launch. So stop by the Twitch channel and say hey, or join the Discord for more BV discussion. And as always, try to stay painless.